Welcome to Life Planning 101, brought to you by Smart Money Group and Kennedy Financial Services in Eastland, Texas. Tune in every week as we share important information to help you and your family live life on purpose. Insurance, investments, legacy and tax planning, and much more. All covered now on Life Planning 101.
Welcome to Life Planning 101. My name is Angela Robinson with Smart Money Group and Kennedy Financial Services right here in the great town of Eastland, Texas, where it is still 90 degrees, late September, and we're going to be 90 degrees on October 1st. Not sure how this is happening. And to add pain to misery, we're going to talk about inflation today. Well, we always talk about some poor subjects right here on Life Planning 101, but they are pertinent subjects. After all, we are here to be able to inform you, help you live life on purpose. We are big believers on, making sure that you have all the information that you need to be able to make wise decisions as life goes on. And let's just face it, we're living in a very complex world. Things are, getting more complex each and every day, and people don't know where to go to for good information and what they really need to be thinking about or don't need to be thinking about. And I think when you couple that with how fast-paced our world has actually gotten, I remember sitting here in 2020 thinking everything has slowed down, and it certainly hasn't slowed down by any means. And so you couple that and you just kind of go through the motions and you run from one thing to the next. And then before you know, you look up and you need something because you've got a dire situation on your hands and you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I would address that 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I just didn't have the time. And so that's why we do this show. We do this show, Life Planning 101, to help you stay informed, to keep you educated about what's going on in the world that might be pertinent to your life plan, your future, your wealth, your family. And so today we are going to talk about how bad inflation could affect your retirement and what you need to be doing about it. Now, when I think about this, I actually think about inflation kind of as like, being clumsy. And I know that sounds crazy. What does she mean by inflation sounding like being clumsy? Well, I mean that because, it's just something that happens. And if you don't address it, it's kind of like, having a chair in the middle of the room and you trip over it, or having a sliding glass door and you run into it. I've been guilty of both. In fact, I'm quite humorous just to watch. I know you've always thought it's just that I'm humorous to listen to because you never know what I'm going to say and get all my sayings wrong. It's actually physical too. So I pulled up this fun thing about the 30 dumbest way people manage to hurt themselves. And I got a few of these, and I thought we'd just add some humor to how bad will inflation affect my retirement? And I thought I'd give you a couple of these. So it could be worse. You could trip over a cat and break your foot, even though your cat's still fine. True story. You could have, tried to, and you might have done this, tried to practice with plastic bags like they're parachutes when you're little and broke your arm. Yep. You could have sneezed, thrown your back out. Can't work for a week or barely walk for a couple days. And oh, by the way, did it all when you're 27 years old. You could have walked head first into a mine sign that says, caution, mind your head. Not your finest moment, right? You could have climbed a tree when you're 12, fell out, broke your arm. Week later, got talked into climbing the same tree with a cast and ended up breaking your other arm. So, yes, bad things happen in life. We trip up. And I would be willing to bet, up till now, you may have tripped up a little bit with this inflation. First, we thought it was a transitory situation. So everybody just kind of continued to live at nominal. And I mean, we thought it was going to be transitory. Who knew that this was actually going to go on for years, right? And so then when you start to see these effects, you keep living as normal, but all of a sudden you can't live as normal. You're either having to spend less, or I say spend less, spend on less things, buy less things, go less places, or you're spending more. Now, years ago, we used to do, a 3-4 night educational class on helping people retire. And we always talked about, there was a story we gave when we explained what inflation was, because see, people kind of were far removed from inflation. In fact, a few years ago, some of you may not even know really what inflation was, because we haven't really had effects of inflation in decades, right? And so we'd explain the risk of inflation. We're going through these retirement classes, and we'd always give this example is if you're on a fixed income, and let's just say that every time you go to the grocery store, it takes $100 to purchase your groceries. Well, if you're 10 years into retirement, maybe that $100 now is really only $90 of purchasing power. So the question is, what are you going to be willing to put back on the shelf because you can't afford it? And that's where we talk to a lot of people about when their money isn't keeping up with inflation and the risk of that, right? And I heard a comment on a radio station a few days ago, and I'm going to tell you, it seemed surreal. And it was that exact story. It was that exact story that we've used for decades to teach about the threat of inflation. And this lady was stating that she went to get her groceries and she was, keeping a mental accounting of what she was buying so she wouldn't exceed her budget. And she continued on to say this was the first time that she found herself putting ordinary items, things that would normally be on her list, not an excessive thing, but ordinary items back on the shelf because they weren't within her budget and she couldn't afford them. Yeah, we're there, people. It's happened, right? Inflation is real. Cost of living has gone significantly up. My husband and I had the luxury to travel outside the country just here recently for a wedding. And we got to see some other countries. I'm going to tell you, America's expensive. It's crazy. I mean, I felt like I was stepping back in time, and sometimes you don't realize how expensive it's gotten until you actually see things, and maybe you do. You look at your credit card bill, you're like, holy smokes, what did I spend that money on? And you realize that you really didn't spend the money on anything different than you normally did. It was the same items, they just cost a lot more, which could be why we actually hit an all-time high this year with credit card balances. Over $1 trillion. I think it was $1.03 trillion is what credit card balances reached in this country. And that's staggering, yes. But from a 1 quarter prior, it increased 4.6%. So that tells you how much more people are actually having to put on their credit card. And that's a balance, okay? That's not something that, is getting paid off. That's actually balances. And that came from the New York Federal Reserve. So, the numbers should be pretty good. And that was a little older. Okay. So I think that report came out as of last quarter. So there's going to be a new one that comes out, here in probably a month or so. And just to think about that is just unreal. This is where we're at. So inflation is real. And I think everyone is asking this question, how long is this going to go on? How long can this go on? How high are things going to get? What is this going to continue to do to me? And I'm not sure, if you've listened to Black and White Market Chatter, Aaron Kennedy, our CFA, he talks about this a lot, that, inflation has a lot of stages to go through before we actually see the end. And, then you have this idea that you've got political pulls with inflation, because it does affect things, somewhat immediately and somewhat long term. You're starting to see the treasury yields. And I don't know if you know about treasury yields, but the way treasury yields do is they're really, and whether they are or not, but they're appeared to be as predictors, right? So the short-term treasury yields have been really high, whereas the long-term treasury yields have stayed pretty low, meaning that the predictor is that we're going to stay in a period of inflation for a short period of time, and then it's going to fizzle out. Well, here recently, we started to see those long-term treasury yields move up, indicating that inflation could be more stubborn and stay more persistent longer than it should. So everybody's asking this, and I don't think anybody has an answer because there's too many variables up in the air. Everything from policy to our health, to our wars, to our immigration, there's so much to this, okay? And that's a question really that you don't need to be asking. And you may be saying, what? Why don't I need to be asking that question? Well, the answer to that is it depends. So you don't have an answer. And so those are your uncontrollables. What you need to be thinking about is the fact that inflation is here to stay, at least for a longer time frame than we originally projected. And the question you need to be asking yourself is, will this stubborn inflation affect my future? And that's what we aim to answer when we come back on Life Planning 101. Welcome back to Life Planning 101. My name is Angela Robinson with Smart Money Group and Kennedy Financial Services. Be sure to visit us online at www.kennedy-financial.com. Be sure to sign up for our weekly life lessons if you are not on it. We, coin really relevant content. We put that out each and every week, and we've got Black and White Market Chatter with our CFA. Aaron Kennedy comes on most weeks and a very short segment. He does a longer show of the Life Planning 101 show once a month. And then, of course, you get Life Planning 101 itself. And we also throw some fun stuff in there and industry updates and tax notices and all kinds of stuff. We've got our sister firm, Briscoe and Associates, which is a tax and accounting firm. And they are often being a contributor to that newsletter as well. So really relevant information. Highly recommend you sign up. And we'll get back to our show. We are talking about inflation. Oh boy, how fun is this? But not just inflation in the sense of, is it here? How long is it going to be here? How long is this going to affect us? Nope. We're talking about the fact that it's here to stay for a period of time that no one projected anyway. So how is it going to affect your future? And here's what I want to tell you. Timing matters. So let's imagine that I'm getting close to retirement, all right? Today, like I am getting burnt out. I want to retire and nobody going to tell me I am not going to retire. I have saved for a lot of years and been diligent and been prudent with my money, everything else, right? So here I go to retire. Inflation hits my wallet at a tune of about 4% a year. Let's add to that we have a market downturn. What's that just done to my retirement, the future of my retirement? Might have to be a Walmart greeter, right? Which isn't so bad anymore. It's actually a good job to work for Walmart. But anywho, timing does matter. So when we run a retirement plan, we help people look at their future. There's something called a Monte Carlo that you can actually put the plan through, thousands of simulations of what market returns do. And the point of doing that is to look at a risk, one of many, by the way. We are not covering all the risks that are in your retirement plan, but one of many, and it's called a sequence of returns risk. And this is the risk that your retirement portfolio underperforms throughout your retirement because it underperformed either so either in the years leading up to your retirement or directly following your retirement or both, okay? And to illustrate that, if you do, I led you to our website earlier. We've actually got a cool chart on this. You could Google sequence of returns risk and look at images and see the differences it makes, right? But we provided in our newsletter this week a chart that kind of shows this, and it shows is from retire1.com. They put out a really cool little chart, so I liked it. We are indeed it. But what it shows is that let's say you had $100,000 and you have one investor that immediately starts his retirement at the beginning of an up market, and you have one investor that immediately starts his retirement at the beginning of a down market, okay? Each of them have $100,000. Each of them are going to pull $5,000 a year from that $100,000 to live on, okay? And then if you look 15, 16 years down the road, they both averaged a return of 4%. Well, you would think because they averaged the same amount, they pulled the same amount out, they should have the same amount of money at the end of that period of time, right? Wrong. So the investor that entered retirement at the beginning of an up market in this situation, okay, and this is just based on, investment returns where went up 9%, 11%, 18%, 14%, 12%, 9%, 11%, 9%, 7%, 5%, -4, -8, -15, -6, -5. Okay, so it went up, then down. At the end of that period of time, he has a little over 100,000 left. He started with 100,000, taking 5,000 a year. He has a little over 100,000 left in year 15. Okay. An investor that starts at the beginning of a down market. So we just reverse the returns basically. Minus 5% the first year, minus 6, minus 15, minus 8, minus 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 9, 12, 14, 18, 11, and 9%. Okay. So just basically flip flop the returns. That investor at the end of that period of time has only $35,889. That's a vast difference, right? It's kind of freaky when you think about it. Okay, so this is why we do what we call sequence of returns risk and run it. And then we also as advisors do things to manage that risk, and we educate our clients on how we're going to manage that risk. Because anybody that tells you that they can time the market, yeah, I would be leery. Okay. So yes, you can look at the markets for what they are. Are they overpriced? Are they underpriced? And there are money managers out there that, just like Aaron and his team do, that assess that information all the time, but they're not market timers. And so the risk is always there. The risk that we never know when something's going to happen, what's going to happen and how bad that's going to have an effect on the economy, or how bad it's not going to have an effect on the economy. And so you've got to be prepared for both as a retiree. So managing for that risk is extremely important. Okay. And then you add to that today, okay, and let me stop there. I want to take you back. So when we were running retirement plans a few years ago, we would do this and we'd say, okay, now let's talk about inflation. Where do we want your inflation to be? And we explain the inflation story, just like I mentioned earlier. That's actually a real story now. And do we want to look at inflation at 2%, at 4%? Historically in this country, it's been somewhere between those numbers. And what do you want to do? And most people wanted that worst case scenario, run it at 4, especially when you're talking about health costs and such. Those actually run higher. So if you average it out, so we run it at 4 and a static 4, and that works. And we run this sequence of returns risk, and we look at all of that, and we see where we come out. Okay, because inflation was kind of had leveled out for years and years and years and years. Well, we're not there now, folks. Today we're facing another risk. And when we come back on Life Planning 101, we're going to talk about how that impacts your retirement plan and what you need to be doing about it. Welcome back to Life Planning 101. My name is Angela Robinson with Kennedy Financial Services and Smart Money Group. And we're asking a question: how bad will inflation affect my retirement? Now, if you've missed any part of this show, I highly recommend you start at the beginning, listen to it. Pretty short shows. I think we do like 22 minutes. So it's very important to get all the facts up to date, because we kind of walk through how long is this going to last. We've walked through timing matters, sequence of returns risk, and what that means. And the reason that's important is because we're going to add another component to that sequence of returns risk in regard to inflation. Okay. So we talked about sequence of returns risk, and what that simply means is that if your retirement portfolio underperforms in the years leading up to your retirement, or directly following your retirement, or both, then you have a higher likelihood of you running out of money if you don't do any planning around that, most likely. Well, you're facing a double whammy today, because today you have high inflation right now. You have high inflation leading up to your retirement if you're about to retirement, or if you've just entered retirement, you have high inflation in the early years of your retirement. And how long is this going to last? And unfortunately, that creates the same phenomenon as a down market does on your portfolio. In fact, it's like a double whammy, right? Because think of it just as a negative return on your portfolio. When we talk to people about why they can take out, say, 4%, say we recommend you take no more than 4%. Well, the reason we're going to recommend that is because if you can make 8% net in your portfolio and inflation is 4, then that leaves you with 4. Well, if we remove that inflation marker up to 5, well, that really only leaves 3% that you should be taking out of your portfolio to not run the risk of running out of money, right? And that's not even foolproof. That's just kind of a starting block base, right? But the point is that the higher the inflation number goes, the more it hurts that retirement portfolio, because you're having to take out more money. So what can you do about all of this? Well, the most important thing that you can do about this, and I should back up. So we asked the question, will this stubborn inflation affect your future? And the answer is pretty simple. It most likely is going to. It may have already have, right? Most likely it already has. So the most important thing that you can do right now is have a plan to fight it. Okay? You can't change it. So now we got to fight it. Now we got to maneuver things and make sure everything's working the way it should and we're ready for it. Because we no longer live in a world where you can recover from keeping up with the Joneses too long. What do I mean by that? Well, I was talking with someone just recently about, they're going to spend this, and they talk about needs and have tos. And I said, what is it a have to? And they're like, well, it'd be nice. And I said, that sounds like a want, right? And the reality is we've lived in the world of want, and want came so convenient because money was flowing so good. Well, money is tight now. Money is getting tighter. And if you continue to do what you've always done, you could be setting your plan in stone for the future and not in a good way. It is more important today than it has ever been in our recent history, the history that we've known as advisors. And that's going back to 1989 when my dad started this firm. He started the banking in the 70s, so he saw the tail end of the fight with the inflation, right? But it's more important than we've ever had to in our recent history to have your financial plan in place and take heed to that plan. Don't just get it, but take heed to it. And I'll leave you with this. So Professor Philip Zimbardo said this: people in life do not regret what they did, but what they did not. That is what they regret. I cannot tell you the number of times that we have heard this. I wish we would have done this years ago. I wish we would have done this a decade ago. I wish we would have done this when we were like in our 30s, for heaven's sakes. And then what they were referring to was their financial plan, their life plan, their retirement plan. The thing is that when we've heard that in the past, economic history, the circumstances around them, gave them a lot more grace than it's going to be giving you if things don't change. So my recommendation is this: don't have a regret of what you did not do. Do something about it today, get a plan, and find out what you need to do to heed that plan. My name is Angela Robinson with Smart Money Group and Kennedy Financial Services. Again, right here in the great town of Eastland, Texas. Visit us online. Sign up for our weekly Life Lessons newsletter, www.kennedy-financial.com. Until next week on Life Planning 101, God bless you. Have a great week. And don't delay. Start doing something today to live life on purpose.
Thank you for joining us for Life Planning 101, brought to you by Smart Money Group and Kennedy Financial Services. If you have questions, you can email them to lifeplanning@kennedy-financial.com. Don't forget to learn how our sister company can assist you with all of your tax, bookkeeping, and consulting needs. You can find out more at briscoeandassociates.com. Be sure to tune in next week for more Life Planning 101. The opinions expressed herein are those of the firm and are subject to change without notice. The opinions referenced are as of the date of publication and are subject to change due to changes in the market or economic conditions and may not necessarily come to pass. Any opinions, projections, or forward-looking statements expressed herein are solely those of the author, may differ from the views or opinions expressed by other areas of the firm, and are only for general informational purposes as of the date indicated. Securities offered through Calton & Associates Incorporated, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Smart Money Group LLC. Kennedy Financial Services and Smart Money Group LLC are separate entities and are not owned or controlled by Calton & Associates Incorporated.